Talofalava, Maloelele, Nisa Bulavanaka, Kiorana, Maloni, Vakalofalahiatu, Namaste, Tēnā koutou katoa, good afternoon and happy World Social Work Day. Yay! Thank you for joining us. In this session, we're going to be looking at well-being and community development, what it looks like, feels like, what it could be like, not only now, but for our future. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Analosa Veukiso-Ulugia, and I have the privilege of facilitating our session. And before I introduce our amazing lineup of speakers, I do need to run through a couple of housekeeping issues. So in terms of our session, it's going to be similar to those that have gone, earlier in the day. So we're going to hear from these amazing leaders, and we're also going to open up the floor to you all. Yes, and you're there. Okay. As noted, this recording is the session is going to be recorded, and I just really want to encourage you all. It's the afternoon. We've had so much rich information. Might have been sitting all day. This is going to be quite interactive. And as Mary shared in our last session as social workers, it is also, it's all about action. So for those familiar with group work and youth work, icebreakers are very important. So a quick activity, 3 questions. And not only does this measure your listening skills, but also how quickly you can type. And so if you're first, imagine that there's an imaginary chocolate fish coming your way. So 30 seconds for each question. All right. So the first question, get ready to type. What was the last thing that you had to eat? We've got 33 participants, so I expect to see, okay, all right. You're hearing toppy pop sushi, apple, very healthy people, coconut bread muffin, noodles, loving it. Well done. And it's coming through. Well done. Great to see you. I love it too. And I'm going to holler out, hey, Fiona, hey, Lennis. Okay, all right. Second question. What's your role? Where do you work? And where are you joining us from? And it could be in terms of the motu or which suburb. Love it. Pōneke. IT Family Start represent. Teacher at Tamaki, Whitere, Welltech, welcome. Welcome to the team over at Moana Research, Vaka Tautua, Tongan Health Society. Fabulous. And we had Melissa, love it. Share your kiwi fruit. Alrighty. And your final question, what's one question or thought that you've had about Pacific community development or well-being? So I'll repeat that question again. Just thinking about the session that you've attended or you're here at right now, what's one question or thought that you've had about community development or Pacific well-being? Well, thank you, everyone. Some great feedback coming through in terms of very rich, needs more work, knowing your role, accessibility, under-resourcing. So these are many of the issues that hopefully in this time that we'll have together, we'll get to unpack. So in terms of so we've got definitely lots of rich food and thought there for our conversation and discussion. So in terms of our speakers, Georgie in his opening address today talked about disrupting the norms, and our names, as we know, in terms of Pacific cultures, names are important. For many of us, it connects us to our heritage, people, place and land. So my minuscule way of disrupting the norms is going to be introducing our lineup of speakers by their surnames. So alphabetically, I'm going to change it up. So starting with, I'd just like to warmly welcome Kristina Sofele, who's the National Manager, People and Capability, who's leading Vaka Tautua's People and Capability Strategy. She brings over 30 years of experience in social work, relationship management, and community development. And in terms of her previous roles, she served as a senior advisor for the Ministry of Pacific Peoples and also senior social worker and case manager at Oranga Tamariki, and then known as SIFS. Her personal experiences on the challenges of navigating New Zealand's health system, inform her work, and particularly in her advocacy and sitting on various boards such as the Atamira Platform Trust. And so if we focus, our focus in the session on Pacific community development well-being, Kristina lives and breathes these values and principles. She's actively involved in her Tongan community here in Aotearoa, particularly in sports, youth development, and church settings. So prior to lockdown, in her role as Auckland Tonga's netball chair, she supported the Auckland Tonga team to attend the Digisaupona's International Netball Schools Challenge. And over at Vaka Tautua, she and her team have been instrumental in bringing to life initiatives and programs for our communities, such as ensuring all 8 of their Older Day programs came together to celebrate Pacific Matua. You know, they instigated awards recognizing members' offerings in categories such as oldest member, highest attendance, and most contribution. And like their other program, Ainga Carers, has served over 20 Pacific families, bringing together carers of those with disabilities to learn about the range of available services and how to access these. So thank you, Kristina. Thank you for joining us. I want to introduce, the amazing Sally Dalhousie. Sally's the Chief Operating Officer over at the Fono, which provides a range of health and social services across Auckland and Northland. She grew up in Invercargill, where her Tongan mum had a strong association with Pacifica. Sally herself went on to become the national president. And in terms of her education, she studied at Otago University and Harvard. She is our first Pacific board member on ANZASW, our Association of Social Workers. She's held various management roles, previously serving at Waipareta Pacifica Limited and also ATWC, the Anglican Trust for Women and Children. She's been recognised for her contribution to our communities. In 2020, she was awarded the Sunpix Pacific Community Leadership Award, alongside another trained social worker, Cause Collective founder Rachel Enosa. So sponsored by MPP, this award recognises Pacific people who lead community organisations in any field that strengthen our communities. You may have also seen her on, Breakfast with Jenny Mae Clarkson, talking about the importance of connecting directly with our communities at the grassroots level. Malo au pito, Sally. And our third speaker, this amazing lineup of wahine toa from Tonga, Emeline Afeaki-Mafile'o. Emeline is the director of Affirming Works, and at the tender age of 25, she's only 30 now, she was running her own mentoring service, which has gone on to employ over 100 people to deliver support to over 5,000 Pacific young people in Auckland. She runs a community cafes, and she and her family developed Tupuanga coffee, a coffee plant in Tonga, which is actually sent across the globe and enables their community development work to continue. In 2006, she was given a Sir Peter Blake Emerging Leader Award, and her initiative and contribution to our Pacific communities have seen her win one of the most prestigious prizes for women, the Women of Influence Award, in 2013. In 2016, she was awarded an Order of Merit for her work with Pacific communities as part of the New Year's Honours. These awards recognise her innovative and extraordinary leadership, of her communities in South Auckland as well as Tonga. Emeline was also the writer for the Tonga Family Violence Conceptual Framework and Training Manual for Family Violence Practitioners. And also, she has a Wikipedia page. Get that. So welcome, Em. So, again, today's session focuses on community development and Pacific wellbeing. And so handing it over to Kristina, in terms of by way of introduction, I'd like to introduce yourself, connections, and some questions that have been posed is like why you chose social work as a career, and has it been what you thought it would be?
Thank you so much, Analosa, and Malolele, welcome to this afternoon's session. That was a very impressive introduction. I think the ladies would agree that we're really impressed with the wonderful connection you've made with our experience and the wealth of knowledge that we bring into this forum this afternoon. Why did I choose social work? I actually didn't. I actually didn't choose social work. And as I was thinking about it last night, people saw in me and Lola and others on here can remember back in the days when I was organising and managing touch rugby teams or work functions or family things or Pacifica Polyfest for our schools. People could see in me something around wanting to help and care for people all the time. And so when I look back at my career and I think about how I came into social work, I wanted to help people. I didn't actually realize that social work was about defining how I would help people. It actually was an eye-opener for me. However, I have been really successful in my career of having been able to navigate the systems of social work in a government agency. And as a result, now I'm now sitting in a beautiful position with Vaka Tautua, like Sally and Sister Emeline. We're sitting in NGO where I think our heart was always to help our people, so that when they asked or they needed something, that we could give them we could respond. We could, it wouldn't be seen as being transference or being inappropriate in the way that we were helping people. So I love where I am today. It was not how I'd set out, but today I can see our people just need a lot of navigation. I came from Tonga when I was very little, grew up here, and I was the navigator. I was the community support worker for my own family. And today it's not surprising that in the roles that we have today, that we are still playing a big part of that role in our communities, still helping our people to navigate the systems so that they can access resources and information that will help them and their families. So I still have the passion that I had. Well, most of you will know we're all over 50, except for Emeline, who's still in her 30s. And sorry, Sally, if you're not even close to 50, my apologies. But I see a lot of old friends and family on this webinar this afternoon, and I think back, and my passion and heart is still for our people. If I can help them and give them something that they need, and similar like it says in the Bible, if your neighbor asks you, why would you not give it if you have something to give? And so it's the same principles, same values that I hold today, and still very passionate. So some people are quite surprised when they meet me today. I still have the same energy. And it becomes very emotional for me because it's still for my aunties, my own aunties and my own uncles and my own families, and what they want when they came here to New Zealand and what they want for their children. And we see that investing in their children will pave the way for them if they get the support and guidance to help them. So thank you very much for the opportunity, Analosa.
Thank you, Christina. Sally, heading over to you.
Hello, Lele, everybody, and thank you, Christina. I am closer to 60 than 50, so that's okay. Why did I choose social work? Yes, it was really interesting. You know, I was born, my mum is from Bangai and Hapai, and my dad was a blonde-haired, blue-eyed Kiwi guy who was living in Tonga and fell in love with mum, and he spoke Tongan and everything. He lived there for 5 years, and for some reason we ended up in Invercargill, and I was born there. And I grew up with a great longing. I felt really uncomfortable about the Palangi world that I lived in. It seemed so shallow. There was no wisdom there. It was a bit negative, you know, Kiwi culture, and things are a bit rough down south. And I was very rough. And so I went to and learned social work or studied social work. It was really around trying to understand where I was located in time and space, economically, socially, politically. And from there, then it was, once I learned, I felt really good about where I was, who I was, and all I wanted to be was useful. And to be able to use those skills that I'd been taught. So I went off and worked at Family Start in Invercargill, helped set that up, and worked with Family Start for a number of years in the front line and then as a supervisor. And I was really fortunate to end up in Auckland. Once my son went off to university, I could finally get back on with my life. and went off to came to Auckland and eventually ended up at the Fono, and I saw that as my opportunity to be able to contribute to community development. There was a book mentioned this morning, With Head, Heart and Hand, which was one of my favourite textbooks, and it was about being able to contribute to the building of an organisation that was owned by Pacific communities, and do some of the stuff that a lot of our Pacific people didn't like doing. So policy writing and, just the boring stuff in the background, and get accreditation for, social sector accreditation, so that we could expand out of health and into the social sector, because we needed to be able to address the poverty, the deprivation that our patients were experiencing. So my longing to be useful and to contribute back to my ancestors and our people has been able to be fulfilled in my role at the Fono. And I've had a couple of roles at the Fono. So just slowly, have gone from the front line and then into supervision, then into team leading, then into managing, and then into now one of the chiefs. So it's been a real privilege to be able to pathway that way, and to be able to show other social workers at the Fono that that's something that they can do as well. And it doesn't have to be at the Fono, but to be able to build an organisation or help build an organisation to the scale that we have, I think it's a really important thing for this country to have, really strong representation for Pacific politically, and so that we can start to, just demand that resources need to be spent for Pacific, by Pacific, and that we can be trusted to look after our own. In fact, we are the only ones that should be trusted to look after our own. And these are the deep things that just stemmed right from studying social work back in the 1800s. Thank you.
Thank you, Sally. And yes, in terms of 1800s, bringing it right back to our 21st century, M.
Malolele, talofa lava, kia ora. It's awesome to be invited onto this forum. Lovely to be part of an initiative run by our leaders, our courageous leaders here in Pacific Social Work. So I really want to acknowledge the committee. I want to thank those that I know on the committee, Tracy and Yvonne and yourself, Analosa. Well done. We can just pretty much let this week fly by us as we're busy doing our work and grinding every day. And it was a big pause. I'm really sorry I wasn't able to join earlier today. I really tried. So I'm really glad that I was able to make it to the session, doing mine, and to be part of it with Kristina and Sally. So like many others, I think social work chose me. I was raised, my parents are first migrants to New Zealand. I was raised in New Zealand, like many of our first generation New Zealand born Pacific kids. We were their translators, we were their advocates, we were their enablers. We continue to do that and play that part. We've been fortunate to do that beyond our own families and our extended families into community, and I think that's where Affirming Works came from. It came from a really hard place, a place where I was initially grieving a best friend that died very young of age, when I was young of age, and how did I want to deal with that grief, and just making choices that I felt at the time were brave choices to leave home and to become better educated, and then that exploration away from South Auckland and away from the familiar really opened my eyes up to new opportunities that I knew that weren't just for myself. And so, I'm really grateful for the discipline of social work, for the empathy that it provides in practice. So it's not just a mind discipline, and just really sucked up the learning and just really loved it, and really, because of my faith, wanted that learning to be more than just in my head. So just really wanted to flesh that out. So I've been really fortunate to turn most of my social work into entrepreneurship. And so my husband and I manage many companies, and one of them is Affirming Works. And I feel like I just feel really privileged every day to be doing what I'm most passionate about. I just took my children out of school. We went to Rotorua for the weekend. So we came back yesterday afternoon. So we got in the car this morning to come to work. I pretty much live 5 minutes from the food hub we run, where my office is. And my husband was like, "Sarah, you're excited about work? You know, all 2 days plus the weekend on leave from 2020 or something." I don't know. And he laughed at my response because I said, "I can't wait. I just can't wait to get to work this morning." So it's kind of like 20 plus years later. Just really trying not to get too familiar with what the practice involves, and really loving that we are in the heart of our communities and serving our communities to the best of our ability. Yeah, it's lovely to be here.
You know, and thank you, Em, for your sharing. You know, in terms of just all the points that you've been able to discuss, and I'm not too sure if you might be able to see the questions that have come through, from our audience. And also want to encourage, if there's anything that our presenters are speaking and sharing, feel free to throw it in there. I guess as we're focusing on community development and well-being, we'd love to hear from you. And again, take your pick in terms of order. What are the pressing critical issues that you're seeing, that you see in your spaces? Sally, we're coming over to you.
Okay. It's a big question, because right now I think we're also overburdened with the COVID response. So we've got burnout as our biggest issue, and staff, not having enough staff. We really need, especially in the Omicron outbreak, with staff going down and all of that stuff. But there's a real need, I believe, for Pacific to be quite strategic in how we collaborate, and we need to be really authentic about how we go about doing that, so that we can have a louder voice in the spaces where decisions are made around how funding is distributed or not. The reality is, I believe that Pacific have a fantastic, we've got so much wisdom wrapped up amongst our various islands that just gets lost with the Balangi way of thinking and where the Balangi decision makers are. And as the world continues to go madder and madder, with social media having a massive impact on how people think now, I don't think there's been ever a more important time for us to assert that wisdom and to reclaim it and to really move forward with it quite boldly. We're so polite, and it's not that we need to do it our way, which is with utter respect. But we've got great orators, great minds, great thinkers. And if we can come together and have a great focus on the work rather than, let's not let egos get in the way or anything like that, push those aside and get on with things. I'm such a utopian person, I think. But, we need to have the vision if we're going to get there. Some of the things that came to mind for me.
To add to that, one of the things for Pacific is understanding that us as Pacific people in the workforce, we also represent the communities that we're working with. And so one of the beautiful things that we have in the Pacific provider world is that reality is not different. So it's not that you're going to work, and as soon as something happens to you, that you separate your needs from your community needs or from your family needs. And so that's been one of the best things, is that in this day and age now, it's with COVID has shown how we can mobilize as Pacific people, that you'll see the great work that's been done in the vaccination, where our people are turning up in droves because they're coming because it's us. Even though they've got the local person down the road who's doing the vaccination and they might be European but the warmth of coming to a Tongan, for example, coming to a Tongan church that has the music blasting, that has all Tongan nurses and people running up, there's no misinterpretation about what their needs are because they can communicate and they can share what's going on for them. They can enjoy that interaction as opposed to going along to what we have known for many years, is that we go along to a service. And I was saying this the other morning, and Sally and Em may have been there, when I said Pacific people didn't realise discrimination until it happened to you or somebody else pointed it out to you. And so one of the beautiful things that we have at the moment with the Pacific provider and the government agencies who are supporting Pacific providers is that gap is closed up. That gap of us feeling that we're discriminated or. So I just want to share a small example of what we found with, we currently have contracts to support people in isolation and providing COVID support. And in any of you on here who have been tested positive or had somebody in your household, you'll know that if you've spoken to Ministry of Health, they ask you all these questions, and two key questions that they ask you is, do you need food support or medical support? And the majority of Pacific people do not take up the offer at that point. But what we found as Pacific providers, people have come because they know Sally, because they know Emeline, because they know Tavita Funaki or Tina or Chris, or, most people are like, oh, ring Tina. They know me here at Vaka Tautua. So there's a lot of things that go on that people think that the system's going to pick up if we treat us all as one. But the reality for our Pacific communities is that we are effective when it's us that's at the front door. It's effective when it's us that's telling the messages. It's effective when we share the same experiences that our own households are going, and we're aligning with our communities. So I think that's one. In previous years, we were always trying to find our way into the systems, but now we are still small in size. Sally and Emeline will testify, we are still small in size because the bigger providers are funded and they capture Pacific communities in their funding. But with what little we have as Pacific providers, we've done huge amount of response. We've done huge to filling the gap from people feeling like the government is helping because Tina or Sally or Emeline has been able to breach that bridge, by providing something that they wouldn't have thought of, i.e. providing food parcel as a small way of helping them use their money to prioritise the things that they're responsible for, whether that be their household or power or children at school.
Well, thanks, Christina. And Em, I just wanted to hand it over to you because I'm just thinking about, your experience and all of you, we had heard earlier today in terms of as social workers, our understanding of, ecological systems theory in terms of recognising all the various layers, players, stakeholders in the space. Em, reflections on the journey, looking back and moving forward.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what it is for me. I've got multiple businesses because I think each entity has its own purpose. And people think that you need to have this perfect entity, but really you need the purpose that determines your entity. So obviously there's not-for-profit entities, there's income generating entity businesses. I have a business set up for operational purposes, which is just for social enterprise. And social enterprise is really dry right now because my social enterprise is hospitality. I made a decision to close our cafes. I've been able to keep all my staff on board because they're all in the food hub. So I pay all my staff in the food hub and we deliver to hundreds of families a week. In fact, when I did my report this morning, our referrals this week alone, our new referrals were 577, and our follow-up referrals equaled over 1,000 food parcels that needed to be delivered to family homes, which is what Christina's talking about around our contracting. And so we've had to really navigate staff being sick, being off COVID, bringing on volunteers, supporting volunteers. Every staff member that you bring on during this time is not just a risk to yourself, it's a risk to your staff and to the staff families that you have on here. So we had to go and get rats before government distributed them from Ngāti Whātua, because I've got good friends in that iwi. And then we just started telling all team to come in and get tested on site as critical workers. And as soon as they were negative, they had to join the line of staff that was working that day. We had staff come in their gowns thinking that they were going to be positive, but they were negative. They had to take their gowns off. So, you know, it's a really difficult time when you're surrounded with cases, when you're in the heart of South Auckland and pretty much all of South Auckland are surrounded with cases, and you are also the workforce, and you are the workforce that is getting sick, and you are the workforce delivering, and you are the workforce leading. You know, you got to really dig deep. And my team works 8 to 8, 7 days a week. They decided that themselves. And even when I try to put some restrictions in to keep them well, they really wanted to do this. And I think the heart of that is, it's who we are. We are the people we serve. Like, I live 5 minutes from my food hub because that's where my grandma lived. I'm a South Auckland girl, and that's who I serve. And my team are South Auckland people, and that's who they serve. And they didn't hesitate to work in the weekend. In fact, they didn't even put in their timesheets. I went out and bought Prezi cards to remunerate them because they don't want to get paid. They see their community in trouble right now, and they really want to be that response and that answer. And I'm so excited that young people still feel that, because I think Analosa, that's what we felt when we were young. That's why somebody started a company at 25. We were so zealous about our community. We believed that we knew a little bit more that we could help our community with, and we wanted to be that solution. We didn't want to be what stereotypes were saying about us, that we were the problem and not the solution. And that's exactly what Kristina is saying now, and we still are. But I love that this next generation believe that just as much, and they're coming on board, and you're trying to apply all this great stuff like living wage and, you know, good work ethics and, you know, all this stuff. But really, they decide to get up in the morning, they decide to come to work, they take a rat test, they stay on board, and they work. And they've gone ahead and they've created 2 shifts. A shift starts at 6, finishes at 12, and another shift starts at 12, finishes at 8. And then they've created this rotational 2-day weekend. And I feel extremely blessed to be running a team that wants that for themselves, you know. And when our staff weren't turning up to work because they were positive and they couldn't, people brought their fathers to work, people brought their husbands to work. We just had all these people responding, and I thought, why would I stop this? Why should I stop this movement? This is exactly how we want our next generation and our community to think when we're in trouble. So how do we scaffold it? How do we take care of it? How do we maybe wrap an entity around it if that's what it requires, and support it, which is the resourcing and the funding? You know, I'm all for collaboration, but sometimes that can be disruptive if it's not the right time, you know, because people need to reset themselves so that they can collaborate authentically, like Sally has said, authentically. Because sometimes I feel like that's a little bit of forced thing on government too, for funding purposes. They force you to collaborate because they want you to all share a corner of the pie. But that might not be the right result for everything. So, yeah.
And I think, you know, and I love it, Em, because I think that was definitely something that was, you know, when we were discussing earlier in terms of our Pacific values and principles, in terms of speaking into spaces, you know, the idea of, you know, I've got to be assertive, but actually our manner of assertiveness is still recognizing the dignity inherent in terms of the other person and that relationships that we do, those relationships we do have. And, you know, there are, as you're all sharing, there are 2 kind of, so everyone who knows me knows how my mind thinks, and already like there's these pew pew ideas. When we talk about this heart, this desire and this love in terms of service, I'm just curious, you know, and, you know, with you all, how do we, as you said, we don't want to stop people when we're thinking about community development, when we're thinking about well-being, there's this heart and desire, but recognizing in terms of there's the emotion, you know, the emotions, the heart, everything's saying yes, and yet the mind and the body might be saying no. You know, we're aware in the kind of roles that we're in terms of the issue of burnout. I'd love to hear thoughts and reflections. Sally, Christina, I can see you both smiling. Yeah.
I think that we, the leaders, need to make sure they've got a really good gauge on what's going on with their staff, and if you've got a lot of staff, make sure you've got the appropriate support, oversight in the right places, because the leader, the ultimate leader, can't see everything in those moving parts. So we need to make sure that we've got supervisors, team leaders. They're connecting with all of the workforce on a regular basis and just checking in. And then we deal with each case as it arises. And give people permission to take a break. I need to train my boss around that, but okay.
Christina, see, I'm doing the whole, I'm handing it over to you.
Yeah, similar as Sally has said, is making sure that you've got those systems in place in terms of knowing what your staff are doing. What Em's talking about is a real drive, as a real internal drive, and it might be for a time and place. It will still require us as leaders to manage what we have, because they're also the same people that go home and need to be there for their own families. And I think Sally mentioned earlier, burnout can be really high. Burnout can also look very quiet, can look, so while you might physically be at work, your energy is zapped, or you're not contributing as much, or your energy level is low. But I think, and then the other part to that is also, I think the priority we need to also be promoting and advocating here is our own families, because, I think, and I hope this doesn't happen to my sisters here, but I can imagine that if something happened to me one day, that my children would say that I helped so many people, but yet I wasn't at home for my own family. And I say that lightly, but that is some of the stories that come in, and it doesn't happen until you're like me. I have grandchildren, when they say, Nammy, what you could do is stop work. And I think it's because we have a real heart for our people, and we know that our people need the support and the help. And so we run off with no boundaries, because we have like Tongans, like here with our sisters, we're always nima moi vae. Vave nima moi vae, meaning we chuck everything down, we drop everything and we run. No planning, no resourcing, nothing until it's finished, and then often, not most Tongans, but some Tongans end up fighting at the end, because, we were all in there doing everything, but we didn't actually plan. So I think it's a 360, it's protecting what we have, what we're doing, and thinking about future for our own families. Yeah.
Fabulous. And one of the questions that's come in from, thank you, Celeste, is like, and you mentioned family, how do we make sure the family's voice is heard?
Yeah, I think it always starts with your own family, like your own well-being, like what Christina said, your own family's voice. I think that's a pouring out. I think it's because, again, it's difficult to say, because I'm thinking you are who you serve. But I think over the years, obviously, there's progression. And so as you grow, not every family you serve comes to you and they're at that end result. So then you have to kind of always be looking for growth, looking for progression. And often for me, that's in my team. Like I recognize, like many of you, I was the first mentor of ADA, and then I was the first manager, and then I was the first executive director, and then the first board chairperson. We've been around for 20 years, and I feel like I set up this organization backwards. But I've been able to play every role and see from every perspective. So I can, go in and have a coffee and have a conversation with a frontliner, talk to a manager elsewhere, create a leadership group, have a meeting with my board. So I feel really privileged to do that. I think that's a Pacific Island thing. We are very kinesthetic. It may look like we don't plan, but I think that we're actually learning as we go. As we're doing things, we're learning, and hopefully it won't be too much of a risk to ourselves. I think also learning to balance that is really significant. I think we're not like the Balangis. we've got a stronger capability. I'm going to say that. And I've stretched myself quite a bit over the last 2 decades, doing a number of projects, wondering what my capability or capacity is, refusing to think that it is a 9 to 5 thing for me, that it's a Monday to Friday thing. And then it might be because I see it more as a mission. And so I homeschooled my children for 5 years as I did business in Tonga, as we traveled back and forth. And then now they're in real schools and I get to really apply myself a lot more better. And so there's just different ways that you live your life with your family so that it supports what I believe is your mission and is your heart. Like, I'm really fortunate to be working full time with my husband. We're both co-directors of our companies and he's here with me at Affirming Works, and we both bring something completely different to our work, completely opposite, and it really works at our strengths. And so again, that's where I think the entity has served its purpose. Really, it's served its purpose in allowing me to work with my husband and to support my family in a unique way, and to really apply my passion for community and community development differently. So I think it's different for everybody, but I don't think that one size fits all. And it's about having constant communication and sharing that, and then going with the season, as Kristina said. Like, I wouldn't be expected to do what I'm doing now if I was a grandmother. I feel like the young ones have all the energy to do all the heavy lifting right now, and so I encourage that and I support that, and I try to really grow their leadership in that area. So yeah, just those targets.
Awesome. Thanks, Em, because I think, in terms of your sharing and, Kristina, Sally, hopefully that's answered, some of the questions that have come through in terms of how to sustain, when we're talking about community development, in terms of, sustaining our own well-being, in terms of having that, and it's something we've heard consistently throughout the day, that this is not just a job. It's not just a 9 to 5. There's that inner sense of, this is a calling and a vocation that for some would say, natural part of DNA. You also made mention in terms of, and again, throughout the day, we've heard about learning on, and the various avenues and mechanisms for learning. And Mary's posed, 2 great questions that I'd like to put to you all. COVID has made visible some of the new inequalities that have not always existed in social services. What are some of your insights about these new inequalities? And I'm also going to throw in her second question, because you may want to respond to either or. It's about the fact that, the Pacifica COVID response has had some funding and has enabled the mobilization of resources. What have we learned from this,
I'll make a start. One of the things that we've learnt is that our people quietly are humble, struggling away in their home, quietly, not engaging in any services, really satisfied with what they've got, until we reach out and we lend a hand. And when you lend a hand, and I use the food box as an analogy or as the example, when you give a food box to somebody who didn't ask for one, and then they start sharing about all their struggles. So I think the opportunity to turn things around, and don't always look at it as if our people are, like some people would say, a handout. People are looking for a handout. Our experience has been that when we've gone and we've met people where they haven't asked for our help, we found that they were the people that have needed the help the most, because they haven't spoken up, and they've just thought that they've got what they've got. They're doing what they can with what they've got. What we found through our MSD Community Connector role is that people have found out that they are entitled to a lot more things that they were not aware of. So I think that that's something that's turning it around, as opposed to waiting for people to put their hand up, or looking at people who turn up at a food hub and there's some level of stereotyping that happens there. Our experience has been that when we've gone and met people, wide range of Pacific people, we're talking about working class people, educated people who have quietly been suffering because to whakamā, to ask for help or to reach out. And I'm not, nothing said about that group, only to say that COVID is just one area where there's been no barriers, and all the typical stereotypes have all vanished. We're just seeing people as people and needing help and support. And so we love it when mamas and papas tell us what's really going on for them. And a lot of it's been because they've not been able to stay connected with their families. And the extra support that they used to get in the home is no longer there because nobody's popping over with the odd meal or the odd, coming and blessing the families because people can't connect. But I think if anything, that's one thing that, so for us not for Pacific people to always be looking for help, but for us to reach out. Yeah.
And it ties in quite beautifully, as you mentioned, when you're acknowledged, there's a question that's come through in terms of well-being. What is well-being for our communities, for our families? And secondly, who defines well-being? And so I'm just thinking, Kristina, about your sharing about an aspect and that a component of that well-being is, in terms of that connection, being seen and heard. Sally, I can see you've got that thinking face on.
Really? Sorry. Well-being, I think well-being needs to be defined by, the people, and we all need to define for ourselves what wellness and well-being looks like. Certainly, if people have got the basics in life is a absolute essential, and when people don't have healthy homes to live in, they don't have enough food to feed everyone, that's going to compromise well-being. People can't meet their aspirations under those kinds of conditions if they haven't got enough money to pay the rent, the bills, those sorts of things. So there's the financial issues that need to be addressed for Pacific. We continue to occupy low-paid positions and having to work too many jobs, and then not having enough time to enjoy with our families and look after our kids and connect well enough. And we've got a lot of stressed people out there. So, but I was looking at Jean's question about the 3 musts for the Pacific community development. I was that was my thinking face, was like, oh, what was that? Sorry, wasn't actually keeping up.
It's all connected. It's all connected, Sally.
So to me, what came to mind was I think the 3 musts, just off the top of my head, are around there needs to be a commitment to Pacific values and an understanding of Pacific knowledge. Then there needs to be excellent strategic leadership, and there needs to be adequate resourcing. I think those are the 3 musts for Pacific community development to flourish.
Thanks. Kristina M., your 3 musts in terms of Pacific community development?
I was also going to answer the question to Mary around sustainability and services, because when we set up our food hub in 2020, we did it without any funding. We had some savings set aside, and we spied out the land, I guess you could say that, from what we had experienced from the short time we had returned from Tonga in February of 2020. We saw that one of the biggest needs was food at the time. And we got the shock of our life that we spent all that money within the first week. And then lockdown was over. We were able to learn from some of our experiences where we had an open registration on Facebook, which we decided not to do. We then put the 0800 number in line. We made people call, which helped us manage the registration and the food supplies. And we kept the food going that entire year. Even without lockdown, people could come to us and get food, which made it much easier for our community to know and for us to get partners. And then it was in 2021 that they announced the 3 secure food providers, and we were announced as one of those 3, which was really fortunate. So I don't think, even with the SOQ pivot, when we were given the discretionary money and we had to redesign enrollments, assessments, essential needs assessments, we had to do all of that, train all our staff, put it on a shared drive, and get the team learning how to pivot during COVID. And as a result, government heard us, government responded, And we have actual ways that we can help directly families in this time of need. And then all of a sudden there's care in the community. You know, so these things, I think we are the eyes and ears in community. We are the hearts and minds. We are the ones that need to inform government of what is required for our community and actually need to step out and actually help prototype and partner these so that we can see this as sustainable. This is not a handout when it's first led by us. This is us informing government of what works in our community and constantly informing them. You know, so then it is like a big job. And I think it's really necessary for us to shift our own thinking on what that looks like for us in partnering with government as consultants. I think my 3 musts around well-being is really, like for me, I think well-being trumps all of the above. I mean, I might not have friends after that comment, but you know, as a New Zealand-born Pacific Islander, I was really offended when culture became an excuse for violence, when culture became an excuse for abuse, when culture became an excuse for anything that was seen to be oppressive upon our community, because that wasn't the culture that I was raised within. You know, that wasn't how our parents raised us. And there were, you know, I think culture is always revolving, and that we can't use it as an escape for reasons that for us to not grow. And so I've always thought well-being was the most important requirement of any young person, any child, and any family. And even though we struggle with the individualization of social welfare in this nation, often that's at the risk of a child or a young person's detriment. So we need to really focus on their well-being, you know, versus the well-being of the whole. But we all know as Pacific people that it's the well-being of the whole that will enable that child a sustainable and a nourishing upbringing. So, you know, there's all these continuums. And so again, we should always be open.
And I know, you know, and many, and we've heard it earlier today in terms of when we're thinking about, you know, not only our profession, but in terms of ourselves, you know, those kind of practices. And, you know, what you've been describing, you know, like, you know, often we hear the term decolonizing practice, but it's going back. And many of our giants, many of our soldiers who, you know, the speakers earlier today would probably attest and say, actually, violence, that kind of family violence wasn't part of our culture. And, you know, in terms of the introduction of various different social structures and systems. I just wanted to, you know, Kristina, in terms of your 3.
Yeah, I think I just, one, you must serve in your own family. You must serve in your own community. I think if you understand what's going on with your own family and your own community, then you're more in tune with being able to help or support. So just some basic things from me is, one is to serve in your own family and in your own communities. There's enough experience out there for you to learn from and for you to help. As Em has said, it's all driven by need and what she saw. And as a result, she did something that could respond to that. And as a result of that, many people were picked up in terms of employment opportunities, workforce upskilling. The second thing is to ask for help. There's so much help that's out there. If you can't relate to your doctor, please, or to somebody who's not Pacific, please, there are enough of us now, even though we're still small in number. You know, the further you go out of this country, out of Auckland, it's even less Pacific providers. But please, if there's anything I want to promote, is to ask for help and to come to a Pacific provider, even if you start with the 3 of us that are here, along with Jean and Mary and everybody else that's tuning in. The last thing I also want to add is financial capability programs. Those programs have been, and I've testified many times around my social work, financial capability is finally is something that is really, really useful and important to everybody. And it cuts across all the behavioural stuff that goes on in people's houses and the way that they make decisions. But it's a very neutral position to undo the layers of the way that people do things or decisions are being made, and brings family back to the heart of making decisions around how to prioritize their finances and to set goals for themselves. If anybody wanted to buy a home, when you do these programs, you work out that, like Sally said, we're a minimum wage. None of us can buy a home. I mean, it's even worse now because of the prices of homes, but at least you know what the starting point is for how to grow and build upon on what you need. And so as a result of that, education for your little children, grandchildren becomes a priority, because you can then see the benefits that are going to come. But those are just 3 things just to add to the ladies' advices that they've given.
Perfect. Thank you. And I just realized I feel like I blink and we're already with 4 minutes to go. I know how amazing is this? So all of you, in terms of our attendees, let's put send through your comments and questions, because while we may not be able to answer in this forum, a reminder that we do have the Shrock Facebook page. So to Kaiser, Lola, Tracy, Selena, and Mary, apologies, we were able to get to your questions in our session, but hopefully there will be another forum to address this. As we are coming to a close of this particular session, I'd just like to, final thoughts and reflections, from our presenters.
Oh, Sally.
I just want to thank you all for your time. It's been a real pleasure to hang out with you, Analosa, Emeline and Kristina. As you can see, we've all got a lot of work ahead of us, but we bring full hearts and full minds to our work. So, maloa pito whalahi atu.
Thanks, Sally.
I just too also want to say a very big thank you for the opportunity this afternoon to be here with everyone. It's amazing. You would not believe this, but actually I see Sally and Emeline more than my own family, because I'm on meetings with them twice a week. But can I say that there's a purpose and a plan for every one of us, and whatever you're doing, wherever you're serving in your community, just do the best that you can, because it could be making the very difference for another person. And even when you're standing there in silence, be encouraged that other people are around you. It could be something that's not even obvious, but may be making a significant difference to another family member or another person. So thank you very much to everybody. And Analosa's probably given our details out to everybody. So very welcome, and look forward to hearing or seeing everybody in person someday. But lovely to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristina.
Thanks again. I just want to echo what the my two colleagues have said. Thank you so much for our time of sharing and hearing us during the season, capturing this time. Actually, I think that's really significant. I think that there is an opportunity for us as practitioners to really shift welfare in COVID, to be honest. To really shake off some of the familiarity that we're used to with what welfare looks like, and really begin, because what I do appreciate about what's happening in this time and season with this government, let's be honest, and with COVID, is that those inequalities are being brought to the front line. They're at the forefront of everybody's hearts and minds right now, even as they're redesigning policy, as they're redesigning systems. And I think that gives us an opportunity to really lead from practice, to really inform from practice what the welfare systems should look like. And so I think that's something that I just want to encourage people that are listening today. And just really grateful for the opportunity to share and to link arms, because I totally agree that as we set strong foundations up in each of our respected spaces, that we'll be able to come together stronger, and collaborate better to what that new normal looks like, which is what people are starting to talk about now.
Oh, and on that note, and you may be able to see the chat function or not, but just again, many thanks to also our attendees who have been kind of flying in and, sending their love and their blessings and appreciation. And, Aluputea Ayono, amazing, fabulous panel. Kaiser, thank you, ladies. All of you are amazing. Continued protection and blessings. And so, again, we're just wholeheartedly thank you, give thanks just for the gift of your time, for this space, and just really look forward in terms of, where to, the next journey, the next chapter, the next adventure that we'll have together, as Pacifica social workers, those committed to our communities. And in terms of housekeeping to our audience, just to let you know that in terms of our final session, I ask that you please remain in this particular space, and Tracy and the team will be facilitating us in our concluding summary. But again, just a heart full of thanks and appreciation, and also a sense of joy and pride in terms of, who we are, who we stand for in this profession of social work. So, malo au pito.